So going into next questions, we have 3 questions as of right now, and they're all going to get weighty and weird by some standards, right? How do you recover from the pain of being taken advantage of sexually, sexual trauma?
You definitely need to start by going to counseling if you need to get medication. I mean, sexual trauma, any traumatic experience requires it needs to be treated. A lot of times I see individuals that have been sexually abused, emotionally abused, domestic violence. They've witnessed a death, so it needs to be treated. So everybody heals differently in their own way, but it is possible to heal. But again, there's no textbook way to necessarily heal from certain things. But it is possible to heal from it.
No.
I think that it becomes a sense of safety. They're not safe. And statistically, it's often men doing it to women, and so that's the pronouns I'm going to use. But for her, men are no longer safe. And she's going to respond out of that in several different ways. And so part of it is trying to reestablish safety, and we've talked about what creates safety, because she doesn't trust. And not only may she not trust the person who did it to her, but the people who let it happen. If somebody knew that it was happening, or someone did not support her trying to get away from it, if it was like a sexually abusive relationship, there's going to be, for me, what I would do is I would just create the safest place for her to talk, or him, because that happens too. The safest place for them to talk about it as they work through it. I probably would send them to WIB for EMDR as well, because I'm not trained in it. But like we said before, that's really great for trauma.
What age do you do in EMDR? I mean, what's the youngest?
They do. I do not do kids, like say grade schoolers. Actually, I have done grade schoolers, but I don't specialize in that. But early adolescence on.
So they respond.
Yeah. The issue with somebody who's been assaulted, first of all, you have to be very careful about globalizing that all men are now unsafe. And that needs some help. One of the other things is that always walking around feeling like you are unsafe regardless of where you are. And so one of the things that I think is important that you recognize is that in this moment, right now, where you are you safe? And most likely the answer is yes. And so for them to really start embodying that, right now I am safe. I'm okay right now. And then some help with situational, helping them just get their brains ready for whenever they get in other situations. Again, not letting the event define them, not letting that event define everybody else in the world, and that takes some work. That takes some work, but especially that safety thing. Right now, in this moment, I am safe. And for them to really embrace that continually can be very helpful.
Just setting a new baseline, a new anchor, as it were. Right.
For younger kids, play therapy works really well. TF, CBT for adults, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy works really well, in addition to EMDR.
Wow. So, transgender issues in adolescence. How can I help a child who is in middle school when they are bombarded with 10 to 12-year-old kids saying that they are homosexual or transgendered?
Is this a parent asking, or?
I would assume it's how can I help a child? So I would assume it's probably not a peer.
You love them well. You treat them as a human being, because it's not your job to change them or tell them they're wrong, but your job is to love them and just be a support for them. Listen to them. Ask how you can help them.
I will say this, and I've seen, which isn't really, it's kind of a roundabout to your question, a lot of, especially younger kids, a lot of transgender children and a lot of homosexual children have a very high rate of suicide, very high rate. And I think that if you have a child that fits one of those descriptions, it is so important for them to be mentally healthy. And I'm not suggesting, that they, anything about what they're doing, if they're homosexual or if they're wanting to transgender, but they have to be in getting mental health help. It is probably the number one group that I have that's in a hospital because they actually almost did kill themselves, and it's their 4th time this year. It seems to me that it's very high, and it may not seem that way with you all, but I think that if you have a child in that category, you have to watch them. They're under a lot of pressure.
Wow.
I think there's got to be more to be said, but I'm not sure what there is to be said. I know that kids today especially are indeed being forced to make decisions. If I had my way, I would explode all social media. I really love the effort that some parents are doing by not allowing their kids to have any kind of social media till at least 13 or 14. To be able to find out with the child by these other people telling them that they are either gay or transsexual, what does that mean to them? Again, trying to find out what is going on in that brain of the child that is so confusing to them. I know for a fact that some kids make the decision to either be gay or not based on their peers. There is something called asexual play. That we stereotype what guys do and what girls do when they're young. And if a guy happens to like to play with, whether it be drama or whatever the case is, nowadays they are pigeonholed. That means this. And they begin to accept that as a truth for themselves. And it's dangerous. And so for the, and I know that I'm flying in the face of political correctness, but I think that is part of the problem. We do, at AFI, we're seeing a lot of kids come in with transgender, wanting to change their sexes, homosexual, more than ever before. And so for them to be able to have a place to talk, for parents to be able to talk about it without getting so anxious, and I think that is also a debilitator. The more anxious a parent is around that issue and being able to talk about it, the more problematic it will become. I know some parents have taken them out of school, homeschooled, not letting them have any friends, And I can certainly understand that, but all that's doing is creating anxiety around this issue. So there's got to be a calmness to talk about this.
I think remembering that a child's
Wow.
brain is not quite developed, they're still learning who they are. So I'm careful to label it. And when they come into my office and they say, I'm gay, I'll always ask, what does that mean to you? Because especially younger children, they're just hearing these words and they don't quite know. And to be honest, I have family in the audience and they'll remember this. If I'd been raised in a different family, I probably would have been a transgender boy because my mom didn't know what to do with me. I didn't want to paint my nails. I didn't want to wear makeup. I didn't want to do my hair. I was out playing catch with my dad. I was rolling around in mud with the boys, punching them and getting in a lot of trouble for punching the boys, which I didn't hurt them. I was small. I didn't willingly wear a dress till I was 15 years old. And if I'd grown up in a different family or at a different time, the trajectory of the future of my life would have been drastically different. And now I'm okay with the fact that, yeah, I am a bit of a tomboy and I don't wear makeup very often. And if it was up to me, I'd be in sweats and a t-shirt 24/7. But I'm still a woman made in the image of God with feminine aspects to me. And I get to be a wife and a mother with that other part of my personality. And so not, like you said, not pigeonholing. If a boy likes ballet, he can still be a boy who likes ballet. If a girl wants to play football, she can still be a girl that likes to play football. And so for me, it's being careful with pigeonholing and labeling because, I mean, a 17-year-old is going to disagree with this, but they don't know who they are, and they don't know who they're going to be.
And then I would say the shame aspect too.
I was going to say
being careful
shame
with the
has to be
shame.
there.
And that going back to what we were talking about earlier, that what shame can do to somebody.
Yeah, gosh.
Reinforcing those labels, that spiraling.
Even on the parental level there as
Right,
well,
yeah.
the isolation that,
And especially too, like if I am ashamed of my kid for being trans, like that you're gonna give that off to your kids. You're gonna give because you give what you have. So just keeping your own shame in check, and like I was saying earlier, love them well. And a lot of times them being trans or homosexual, like that's not the issue. Like you were saying, like what does that mean to you? And kind of going down a little bit deeper than just you're trans, you can't be trans. You're gay, you can't be gay. That's counterproductive.
And what Wib said when we talked about this a while back was when parents are afraid to have these conversations because it's what does it mean about me if my kid is this?
gotcha.
And so parents don't be afraid to have those conversations. Mark Yarhouse, who is a Christian that has studied LGBTQ issues, talks about in some of his books having just the safety. We talked about safety a lot. Yeah, and for them to be able to talk about it and work through it without the feeling that they're being judged or that there's shame associated with what they're saying or potentially with what they're feeling.
Yeah, Yarhouse does a really good job, especially delineating 3 particular areas. He says you can have, it's not abnormal to have feelings for somebody of the same sex. So you have the desire. Then some people may experiment and act out. And then there is the identity that comes. And what he does a great job, he says, you can do these 2 without ever going here to make it an identity. You have the feelings, you may even experiment and act out, but you don't have to say, well, that's who I am. And we don't do that in our society. We basically say, if you have those feelings, you are. We jump way over there.
Wow. It's kind of a lot to process, actually, in that. That's an incredible, because it's even that, it's that pigeonholing, right? It's either this or. Wow. Mental illnesses. This is our last question that we have sent in. And then I'd like to turn it over after we kind of flesh this out. I'd like to turn it over to you guys and kind of let you, whatever's laying on your heart a little bit to share with us. But last question, is mental illness a physical event with spiritual side effects or a spiritual event with physical side effects? Do choices, emotions trigger biology or biology trigger choices / emotions? It's like reading Paul.
Yes. That's what I
Yes.
say. Yes to
Yes.
all of that.
Yes.
Both and.
Yes.
Okay, thanks, guys. It's been good to be with
It's been a
you.
good night.
Well, like habitual sin can cause anxiety and depression. But also, if you're at a genetic or disposition to bipolar, like that can cause, you see people that they've grown up, great family, great support system, and then they start struggling with bipolar at the age of 21, 22. So it's, everything is connected.
Hmm.
Ask that question again.
Okay. I'm going to work through it.
For the next 15 minutes.
Okay. You want me to ask it again? Are you good?
Yeah.
Okay. There's a lot going on, yeah. Is mental illness a physical event with spiritual side effects?
Okay, pause.
Yeah, that's a question.
Okay, just leave it there. It can be, because it becomes a spiritual issue as you go into the shame. You wonder whether you are saved, if you're really the Christian you need to be. But again, it could be. It shouldn't, but it could.
Or engaging in like maladaptive risk-taking behaviors.
The rest of the question?
Yep.
A spiritual event with physical side effects.
Well, that's why I was saying the habitual sin
Mm-hmm.
or unrepentant sin can cause depression, anxiety.
Okay.
Or if you read Proverbs, Proverbs really talks a lot about a fool and a wise man and the fruit of that and what happens.
Sure. I would see this with drug addiction as well, right?
Yeah.
Do choices, emotions trigger biology, or biology trigger choices and emotions? I guess if the brain's
If
changing.
you're at a genetic disposition to schizophrenia and you smoke, I've seen this synthetic marijuana that can trigger the schizophrenia. I've seen kids that were fine until they were 17, 18, and their parents bring them in, and they're like, he smoked synthetic marijuana, and it's been a month, and he has just like not gotten out of this. And so that can be really scary for a lot of people because you just don't know if your great uncle had schizophrenia.
Gosh.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this question with this is, I guess especially teenagers, just based on brain development, so they could be here, and then when their brain is developed, they're there, and so you can have an event, whatever, and it's just going to trigger two different things. You're essentially two different people.
Yes, and I've seen in teenagers where a lot of traumatic things will happen consecutively in their life, and then they come out very different than who they were before, with multiple diagnoses, not just mental but physical too, that it completely changed their life, the trajectory of their life, their hopes, their dreams, everything they thought, and just those few consecutive traumatic experiences changes everything.
I think it's a genetic predisposition with the right environmental influence, whether it's a trauma or a drug or something, can trigger massive changes. I've seen it with methamphetamine in teenagers, I feel like.
And I want to make sure we're careful when we say things like the biology caused my choices and actions, because I think we've all seen this where people are like, well, I'm bipolar. That's why I did that. And they're basically excusing their actions because of their diagnosis or something about them, when that's not an excuse to act that way.
Yeah, people have used that for personality profiles. That's just the way I am. That's just code for I don't want to change. There is something about personal responsibility that we have to take into play. There's a lot of research going on right now in the issues of the brain and how we think. What we think, can directly affect not only how we act, but how we feel. Okay, It can actually change your DNA
Hmm.
with the right thinking, the positive thinking. It can change DNA. I mean, if you think about just the difference between a person who has cancer and who has a very positive mindset, it doesn't always mean that they're going to be cured, but the likelihood of them surviving is greater than the person who has already said, I'm checking out, I'm done, I'm over. I mean, our brains are so powerful. We are still, the brain research is just exploding over the last 10 years. We're still finding out so much. But we do know that if we can watch what we think, it directly relates to how we feel, our emotions, and then that can change our behaviors.
Wow. On a genetic level, even. It just,
Neuroplasticity. So if you guys want to check out, just Google neuroplasticity. There's awesome books on that stuff. So,
wow.
and I guess essentially what you're saying is the cognitive triangle too. Like thoughts influence emotions, emotions, behaviors, and they all kind of play off of one another.
End up creating an automatic thought if you are doing the same thing over and over again. Neuropathway. And then I tell my clients whenever we're talking about redirecting their thoughts, it's going to be hard because you're kind of rewiring your brain because you're having to intentionally choose a different thought over and over and over and over again until this pathway hasn't been used often enough that we start taking this one more.
Interesting.
You think about like dementia, Alzheimer, if you actively engage in cognitive exercises, my dad does Sudoku every day. So, but if you look at someone who engages in like those cognitive exercises, those problems, like cultivating their problem-solving skills, and you compare, like, the brain looks different.
Right, right. So you can teach an old dog a new trick.
You can, yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. All right, so we're at the end, into the questions. Thank you for being just so open and willing, just with your information and your insights. I'm going to ask you guys to do this, just kind of parting thoughts. You have the microphone. You have your chance to tell random people. What would you tell them? Things that you're looking for, things that be aware, positive things, whatever.
I would say in counseling, I'm sorry, if you want. A lot of times people tell me, I just want to be happy. If I could just be happy.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell them, you have to be careful with wanting to be happy. Happiness is an emotion. Emotions are fleeting. Emotions come and go.
That's a good word.
And experiencing an emotion such as happiness is not going to increase until you change behaviors and thoughts. When you can change behaviors and thoughts, then you're more likely to experience happiness. But even then, think about grief. So what I really spend a lot of time letting people know is that I want to cultivate joy in your life. I want to cultivate your character, your grit, your endurance. Doing those things is my priority in here. And just maybe that'll help you experience happiness a little bit more frequently.
Right on.
I would just say, I see this a lot in my practice, and it's increased a lot over the last few years. But I think in general, as parents, we start seeing things that are concerning to us and our children, and we just think it's a phase, and it's going to get better, and it's going to go away. And then 6 months later, it's a phase, a year later, and then they're coming in when it is not even a minor problem. It's an emergency. I mean, it's a true emergency, or they're at the hospital because they overdosed on something, and they're in a really bad place. And I would just say, with our kids, none of us are perfect, and none of us are perfect parents either. But just stay in touch with your children and keep communication open with them. And if you see something that is concerning to you at all, just go in and talk to your pediatrician or your family practice doctor or whoever. And if it alarms them, they will let you know this is something that could keep getting worse, and let's take care of it while it's just a minor problem and it's not an emergency 6 years later where your child is having serious problems. So get help when you start seeing anything that makes you concerned. And then they may look at you and go, oh, I'm not worried about that at all. I mean, you know, kids do this all the time. But that's just what I see a lot of, things just waiting until they explode like a bomb.
Wow.
I would say mental health will continue to be a taboo topic in the church as long as we continue treating it like that. So when you have a couple in your Sunday school class who's like, yeah, we started seeing a marriage counselor, and then you're like, oh my gosh, did you hear that? What is wrong with them? Rather than like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that you guys care about your relationship so much that you're seeking outside help. Did you hear so-and-so's kid is on anxiety medication? What's wrong with them? No, like, being willing to, I probably scared our little church when my husband went and viewed a call, and I'm up there, I'm like, yeah, just so y'all know, I'm a huge advocate for mental health. I'm on anxiety medication. I see a counselor. Like, let's do this. If you continue to treat it with shame, it's going to have shame attached to it. So be willing to talk about it openly without judgment.
I think I want to speak to the marriages out there. There is a concept that is, I think, misapplied, and that's what we call co-regulation. Co-regulation is if I feel a certain way in my marriage, my spouse is responsible to fix that. And if you don't fix it the way I think you ought to fix it, then you don't love me. That's unhealthy. What's healthy is what we call self-regulation. I am going to regulate my emotions and my behaviors regardless of what my spouse does. My spouse is not going to dictate my behaviors. My spouse is not going to dictate my perception of myself. And because of that, if I can regulate myself, if my spouse can regulate herself, now we can connect in a healthy way. And so there's a lot of stuff out there that I think is misapplied. And I just wanted to leave that with the marriages here in this audience and let you really wrestle with the fact that personal responsibility is what you have to take.
And your spouse doesn't fulfill you or complete you. You don't need them. They don't need you. You need God. They're your partners. They're your teammates. But you do not fulfill one another. It's not. It shouldn't be a transactional relationship. It's a covenant.
So thank you for what you do. Thank you for coming up here and sharing your thoughts and answering our questions. Can we get some love for our panelists up here? Hey. Yeah. Good job. We do have, if anybody out there has any other questions or would like some resources of really just more information about anything that we talked about here tonight, you can go to info@oasissbc.com. And then we can send you a list of resources. Immediately outside and to the left, you'll see a table that's also got some resources, some books, and some other literature if you would like to have those, and go check that out. And I think that's it. Thank you so much for just doing this, and certainly as a church, as we continue to pray for our community, and we just seek out opportunities to just to love well and love our community well. So with that, we're dismissed, and it's good to see everyone. Thank you.